start there.
Okay.
Sydney, where did you grow up, and what was life like when you grew up?
So I was born in Chicago. My dad was in medical school out there. And then when I was 5, we moved back to Utah. So I have my roots in Utah. My dad's practice is here, and I am the oldest of 8 children. So
Oldest of 8?
Oldest of 8, 4 girls, 4 boys.
And Utah County?
Yep, my family lives in Linden, down my parents do. I have some siblings around the country, but we were all just on an Alaska cruise together, all 18 of us last week.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was pretty fun, actually.
What was it like being the oldest of 8 kids? And we have stereotypes about the oldest and responsibility for the oldest. And certainly when you have 1 or 2 younger siblings, but what's it like having 7? Did you feel that stereotype?
I think when you grow up in a large family, you're kind of oblivious to whatever those roles are supposed to be. It's just kind of the dynamics of whatever your family. So I didn't really think too much about it. Although when my youngest brother was born, I was actually really mad at my parents for having an 8th child. So like, we already have enough people in the family. So I was really frustrated with them because I was 16 when my youngest brother was born.
Wow.
And but then after I got through that, I was like, and I think this is just true in life and like relationships. I felt like our age difference was so great that if I didn't spend time building a relationship with him, we probably would never have one over the course of his life. So then I became really intentional as I headed to college to be involved in my family. Family's a big part of, I think, my identity, but also who I am. I would choose to spend time with family over friends. And that goes true for like my own children and just extended family, just because I think those ties are super important. So I didn't, relatively speaking, my childhood wasn't full of lots of like hard struggles that I had to come through. Everyone has lots of challenges. I don't think anyone escapes trials or challenges in any phase of their life. That's just not possible in the world that we live in today or in anything. But I was fortunate enough to have parents where education was super important. And I was also fortunate enough to have parents, so being a female in STEM, right, it's highly unusual. And my parents early on recognized that math was a thing that I was really good at. And they did everything they could to accelerate that opportunity for me, even though there were a few women there. When I was a senior in high school, I did an internship as a software tester at a tech company. And for me, that kind of solidified my destiny going into technology because I had that opportunity. I'm not sure without that that I would have entered technology. It's just not possible. You just can't see those opportunities. There was no other women who were going to go into that. There were no other role models. There were no mentors. So there's one opportunity, which is why I love internships. I love giving kids early access to things they don't normally have access to. Because when you do, they just see an entirely different world. And even still today, most children don't grow up with parents who are in tech. Like for young women, I think our stat is 95% of them don't know any women in tech or have any role models, which is still why they don't go into those fields. So that like one opportunity that I had to be a software tester my senior year of high school, I think changed a lot of my career path.
Do you think then fundamental, so if we could dig in on that just a second, I think you mentioned your mom and dad, you didn't say either of them was in tech.
Nope.
Medical health practice. What allowed you to be exposed to it? What allowed you to gain appreciation or interest for it? Or was it literally just that moment and the internship? How did you build the interest before that, or was there none?
So it all started from math, actually. The ability for people to recognize that I could accelerate at math as like a core problem solving skill set. So then I did that while I was also dancing, just to be clear. Those were 2 important things along the way. But my parents didn't really know anything about tech, but they knew that because I understood math, they should put me in places or help me like find those things that could open other doors. So I did all the accelerated math, and then they pushed, I don't know if they pushed me or it just naturally also came that all the business stuff that were happening were computers. So the intersection of those 2 things started happening in high school. And I just really stayed in those 2 paths. When I was originally in high school, so we created this organization called the Esteem Team. It was very early on, a combination of what is now like the Hope Squads and some of the, like for us, it was a whole program around making sure the school was drug free. We won a national award from the first President Bush for the program that we implemented. So I was very sure I was going to go get my PhD in educational leadership and go into the education side from all of that. So I was on this path and I had all the math stuff. And then I got this internship. And then I got a scholarship to BYU in an engineering department. And so I went originally to the engineering department. I actually hated that program. So I switched over to computer science because I did not like the engineering one.
Right, like mechanical engineering or something?
It was electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. And
there were definitely no women in that program. But I didn't love those classes. And so after my first 2 semesters there, I changed over to computer science. And I even remember in my 3rd year of computer science, I was like, I'm not sure I love everything. Like, I don't want to go be a programmer for the rest of my life just at the time, the stereotype would have been completely like in a dark cave, like all by yourself for your rest of your career.
Suddenly computer scientists are cool.
What
exactly. The heck?
I know it was not true.
It was not true. No.
It was not true.
No.
But I remember like sitting there my 3rd year and saying, and my parents were also really like directive on when you go to college, you should think about a skill that you come out that's marketable. So we had lots of conversations. They would have let me do anything I want. They didn't really care. But they often had an interesting conversation around that, which is probably why dance is a minor, not a major. But I was struggling. There were some classes that were super hard. I'm like, I don't know, can I make my way through this? And I'm like, okay, I'm 3 years into it. I only have a year left. I'm just going to finish it. And then I believe, and I still believe today, that it would open doors that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I was just I'm a big believer that you finish things and you do things, not necessarily because you're going to end up being a programmer. Actually, I've never been a programmer in my career. I know how to architect things. I know how to build things. I've been a really great product manager, but I'm always a believer that those things lead to other doors, right? And the doors that you can't see and you don't know exactly where they're going to take you, but if you do them, then you'll have other opportunities that you can't possibly understand today.
So then high school and college, would you have been stereotyped and predicted to be the success that you are today? Were you a great student who was the teacher's pet and did everything perfectly and did all your homework?
I would say, for sure I was a good student.
Yes, but...
For sure I was a good student, and I always naturally gravitated towards like leadership roles. But I also have like a conservative side of me where I've also always like, I don't like people judging me. And sometimes when you put yourself out there in certain circumstances, you can feel that other people are going to judge you or think you're not good enough or in those circumstances. So I always have had that balance of those. I think there's some people who would have said yes because I was naturally always willing to like step up and go lead things. But I don't think it's as black and white as like you would be like, oh, absolutely. I don't think my high school friends would have predicted computer science and then running companies.
And so let's go into that. So you're a newly minted CS grad at BYU. How do you decide what to do next, and what chapter do you take on next?
So there's a common theme in my life, which is every intersection of my life, I actually never know what I should do with my life. That's kind of how I feel. I'm like, I don't know, like whatever. And even still today, I will do that. Even a couple of years ago before I took the role that I took now, I hit these intersections and I'm like, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do. So when I came out of my undergrad, I was in one of those situations. So I decided I would interview with every company that would talk to me. I put my resume in the Career Placement Center in every company, and I did 100 job interviews.
Wow.
I was like, I have no idea, but I should just go talk to all of these people about all of these opportunities. And also everyone will interview a woman in tech still today. So I was like, I should just go talk to all of them. So I started talking to people, started being like, I don't like that. I don't love that. And then I also decided to take the GRE and the GMAT and apply to grad schools. So I just had
every
an entire option. Exactly. It was really true. I was like, I don't know. I really don't know what the next step is that I should go do. So I had interviewed with all these companies. I had offers that were coming in, and then I had applied to grad schools. And so I applied to some for my GRE for just general master's degrees. And then I had applied to some MBA schools. And so it ends up happening that I got accepted to BYU's daytime MBA program and a job offer from a local tech company, which was Novell at the time, in the same week. And I had three departments, and I had like flown to like IBM Global Services. I had all these other places that I was considering going. And when the Novell guys called me, I went to them and I said, look, I would actually really like to go to grad school. Will you work with my daytime MBA schedule while I go to school? And they said yes. And so BYU doesn't actually let you do this anymore. You can't work full time and go to school full time. They make you sign some contract, but they did not make me sign some contract. So I would go to school so I jumped right into, and I took a job in advanced technical support at Novell, which was not my favorite job, but I also am a believer, like, you can do almost anything for a couple of years if it's getting you to a destination. But quickly in that Novell job, like within 6 months, at the time we were like hex editing databases of like major directory services. It would be like Active Directory kind of development today. And then I got the opportunity at Novell to travel all over the world and teach like technical classes everywhere while I was in my graduate program, which was a really cool opportunity. So I used to go to school from like, my classes were 8 to noon, would do group studying into 4, and I would work 6 days a week from like 5 to 10 while I was in my graduate program. Doing technical support.
Wow. That level of commitment is rare, was rare back then, is really rare today. Did you recognize that in yourself back then? Did others recognize it?
I had no idea, right? I was just like, I was kind of like, I just want to do all of these things. So I'm just going to go negotiate my path to make all of those things happen. Because as I came through my computer science pathway, I felt that having a technical degree and a business degree would be an interesting combination that would let me do things that I thought would allow me to create in the future. So I knew I just needed those two. So I think I was too naive to know that it would, like, I was trying to intentionally orchestrate stuff, but I was too naive to think that it was unique to me.
Did you feel that you were putting a pause on your friendships and personal life and that sort of thing doing this, or was that not an intentional?
That's a good question. We got married 3 days before I started grad school.
Wow. Okay.
So
you were already married and you were married.
Yes.
So you chose that path too, concurrently. Why not?
Why not?
Just multi-thread the whole thing.
Exactly.
Now you're going to say you were also dancing between midnight and 2 now.
I wish I had time
to do that too. What did so obviously Novell was an amazing company that grew and became amazing.
Yep.
How long was the journey at Novell?
I stayed at Novell for about 5 years. It was, and I wasn't going to stay there. So they were a great pathway. They actually paid for my master's program too. Wow. So that entire thing was just, you couldn't really have asked for a better situation to do all of those things at that moment in time. And somehow I was bold enough to ask the questions even at that stage, to just say, hey, I want this, but I also want this. Will you help me? And they were willing to help me. When I came out of my graduate program, I had been the president of like the management consulting club, because I was really confident I wanted to go be a management consultant. And so I had created my entire network during my graduate program in that direction. And I had a bunch of offers all over the country for those types of companies. And then as I was approaching graduation, it kind of dawned on me that if I took that path, it was going to require me to travel like every day. Because at that point in time, the world doesn't look like it looks today. But if you were a management consultant, you would be on the road 90% of your time. You were never going to be in a city. And something in me just said, are you sure that that's the path that you want? After I had these offers and I was looking to go out of state. And so I went back to the Novell team and I was like, are there other opportunities here? I ended up switching into product management and running one of their really large product divisions. And that became probably a very defining moment for my path. It took me out of just thinking of like the consulting into product management, which has really become a core of my entire career. How to develop great products that people love, that you can introduce into market in all sorts of ways. So I spent 2.5 years in product management in a very large company where you learn amazing processes. And I would even say thousands of people I know from that network are still good friends of mine today. And our paths have crossed 1 million times in my career.
Can I ask roughly what year that was?
I left
product.
Yeah, it would have been in like 2000, 2001.
So, I mean, really, there were not many folks with the title.
That's right. It was
product.
A new title.
It was a really new concept in tech. Really cool. And to have done it at Novell.
Yeah, it was fabulous. Our number one competitor was Microsoft. We're head to head with Microsoft in every aspect of our business. which was also really fun because every stage was like us and Microsoft like beating each other up. And you learn so much about competition at that level, messaging, positioning, what it takes to create opportunities, how you win customers, what customers expect from you. There's very few stages that you can learn that amount of acumen that quickly.
So did product last for you for a while? Did that sort of define your
For
career?
sure. Yep. Since then, I've always been inventing product. Always.
How? When was the first moment that you decided to be something as opposed to something not an executive in a company, an entrepreneur or otherwise?
Yeah.
What moment was that?
So I had taken all the traditional paths you would assume, right? You're at a company, you have this job, and you build your career, and then you just keep taking those steps down. When I left Novell, I jumped to a startup, and I ran product, and then became like the CMO that also owned product there. So it was very like all the same, right? And then I jumped into a COO job about 7 years later. And then there was this one moment where I decided to leave a company, and I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. And he was a good friend of mine, but when I was CMO, he was CTO. He's probably the smartest person I know. He did his PhD in computational biophysics from Harvard. And you probably don't get smarter than Tom. Like he is, and he's just the best human you could possibly meet. And he had gone to head up Disney research at Disney. So Ed Catmull had created a vision when Disney acquired Pixar. They decided to create a division that was really focused on how technology would transform the company over the next decade. And this was really important, like Ed's vision of how it looked. And so they created this department, which was full of all these brilliant PhDs and postdocs all over the country. We had a lab at Carnegie Mellon. There was one at MIT and Harvard. There was one in ETH in Switzerland, which is kind of the MIT of Europe. And they had these brilliant people thinking about robotics, computer vision, AI, 3D, anything that you can think that's complicated, that takes a long time to solve. They had created this department. And so I'm talking to Tom on the phone, and I'm like, yeah, of course, I don't know. Like, what should I go do, right? I don't know the next step. And I had done all the traditional, like, this is just how you're building it. And Tom's like, Sid, you should come down. We need people who have technology and entrepreneurship experience to come in and go run, how do we commercialize the technology that's coming out of this department at Disney, or these innovators at Disney. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I flew down there and I have this interview with Tom and all the other people at Disney Research. And I come back and he's like, okay, Sid, here's the deal. You totally have the job, but this is brand new for us. We don't know exactly what it looks like. We don't know how long it will be. We don't know if it's just going to be one project or lots of projects. Could be 6 months, could be a really long time, but it would be super amazing. You should totally do it. And I said, okay, I think I'll go do that. Yeah. Like, it seriously took me like 10 seconds. I'm like, no one's ever going to call me from Disney again and say I should go do this.
We were all waiting to hear you say something like, and I decided against it, or something like that.
I was like, no.
Crazy.
No. Yeah. That was the moment where my career changed from being like, I'm going to be at these companies. It's going to be from this paycheck to this paycheck, to becoming what I kind of think about as an owner of and an architect of the career path that I wanted. Being able to like figure out the skills that I wanted to learn, go find the opportunities to do those, and do that in a way where, and I would really say since then, I've never had just one thing that I was doing, like whether it's volunteer things or other things that have built networks around that, just became this important path where I'm like, oh wait, I own my career. Company I work for doesn't own my career. I own my career. I get to make decisions that build my skill set, and then I get to decide what to do with them.
Amazing. Please tell us about an exciting product that you can share that you launched as
from
part
Disney.
Of this. Yeah.
And I ended up spending 6 years at Disney.
Wow.
And it was truly a magical experience spending time at Disney. And if you don't love Disney, I'm sorry, you should.
Some of the people here are probably asking, did you get a pass automatically? That's what they're wondering, right? That's the most important.
One of the cool things about Disney, so I have 3 children, and when I was at Disney, I was based here. My office was technically out of Glendale on Flower Street, but I commuted a ton to Florida. I think my kids probably went 30 times during the time that I worked there. And I would try to architect when I had to go spend like a week there. At times my kids could go also, because I got to stay for like, really inexpensive on the Disney properties. So they would come stay on Disney property and I would work. We also did like 4 Disney cruises because we launched products on the Disney cruise lines. So for my kids, it was an amazing experience.
That's pretty cool.
we did one trip where I had some project, can't remember what it was. I was launching in Orlando. We were there for a week. And then it was the opening of Cars Land in California. So they flew with me and we went to the opening of Cars Land. They just had all sorts of cool experiences like that. It was a great job for my family. So I did a number of really cool projects at Disney. And Disney has a couple of things I think that are really interesting. When Disney always talks about like guest experience, right? You hear that, you think about it, but it's not just something for them. Like oftentimes I think when people build product or they market, they think about things like slogans or messages or why do people buy? But at Disney, I gained just a much deeper appreciation for it's not about this experience. It's about everything underneath it that built what this is. So it's true all the time. And we were in a room and someone said something like guest dissatisfaction, the fastest way to kill a project. If something was going to do, even on very small levels. So for Disney, the idea that the guest is at the center is culturally driven. It's at every stage and there's nothing you can do to change that. It's the reason that if you go into a park and someone sees something happen that they know they could fix, they're empowered to change it. They don't have to go get approval from 10 bosses. Like just fix this. Because they understand that you build loyalty by amazing experiences and by creating like just deep appreciation for who those guests are. So I did two things that I really loved. I did a bunch of work with Star Wars. So I know a lot more about Star Wars than most people should know. But I actually had the opportunity because we could make you frozen in carbonite like Han Solo. And we reproduced the carbon freezing chamber on one of the stages in Hollywood Studio, which was, it was pretty fantastic. Like who else gets to recreate like the carbon freezing chamber? And I got to learn all about like fog machines because we wanted fog machines inside. And so there's all sorts of different kinds, if you didn't know, right? And they do different things, but it was this entire story-driven experience from the very beginning to do that. So I did a ton of Star Wars. I did so many different projects. One of the big projects we launched was at the opening of Cars Land. So Disney's, when I was there in research, we did these massive R&D open houses every fall. And we would probably invent or show 40 to 60 technologies, most of which you'll never see. But they were all about like, what are things that could transform and how do you inspire? Because technology can be as small as, if you ever watched Tangled, and in Tangled when they cut her hair and there's this huge light beam that goes up on the screen. Now you'll have to go back and watch it if you haven't been watching Tangled frequently. There's actually a piece of innovation in code for how you build animation that allows the light on the screen to show like it does. It was a technology that came out of Disney research. And so there were very, very specific technologies like that. And then there were really big platforms. Like we built rides that you will never ride on that we would do at the R&D open house. So at one of the R&D open houses, there's a whole conversation around when people go watch nighttime shows, usually you watch them, but you're not involved in them. And at Disney, everything's about a story. How do I bring you into a storyline? How do I make you forget the world around you? And just for a moment, make a memory at that time. And so we decided you should do that at nighttime shows. We thought one of the great ways that we could do that is through the light up merchandise. And so we showed this at the R&D open house, Mickey ear hats that if you watch a show, integrate with the show control system. And so that you become an active participant in the spectaculars at night. So we launched it with World of Color. Has anyone seen World of Color? Yeah, I consider it like the Bellagio on steroids. It's amazing, right? The water is the screen. It's got lights, it's got fire, it's got everything you can imagine. And so we built and launched a product for the opening of Cars Land, where if you wore a Mickey ear hat, you would light up with the show control system in an exact pattern that matches. And there were 3,000 people that night in the audience, all with these Mickey ear hats on. And you got goosebumps when you watched it. It was so powerful to see all of the people now part of a storyline at night. And the hats were super cool. We had to invent these PCBs, these programmable PCBs in them. 2 hats stood next to each other. They could talk to each other and sync up. If you watched a show, they would sync up. If you walked into Tomorrowland, it was a different program than Main Street. And we ended up launching those all over all the properties all over the country. We put them on the cruise line. Wow. It was a really fun project to launch. It was very technical. We launched it in 7 months, which is also unheard of, because we did demos in the late fall and Cars Land was opening in June. And so you had to invent a hat that had technology in it. We didn't have any of those. We had to integrate with the show control system. So you have to go integrate with an entertainment system. And then you have to install infrastructure in the park that can communicate with the ear hats and synchronize those across the entire park. So we did it really rapidly. The hats were getting produced over like Chinese New Year. There were all these shipping things, like all the things that you can imagine. And, things like Star Wars Land, Disney worked on that for 12 years. Like it's a very long time horizon to get something traditionally out. So doing anything in 6 or 7 months blows out everyone's time. So we had the opportunity to do a lot of like entrepreneurial kind of agile development inside of an infrastructure like Disney.
So our product team is wondering that. How do you do something that intricate, that interconnected in 6 or 7 months?
Scrum. I feel like Scrum.
Without having it blow up.
Oh, we made many pivots, many pivots over time. I remember when we were developing the hats, there was a chipset we needed, and there was a die in the chipset we needed that was, talk about supply chain challenges, that was couldn't get sourced in time. So we had massive changes in like, okay, what's the chipsets that are going to go in the PCB, all of those supply chain challenges. But I'm a big believer when an opportunity comes, you make all the pivots necessary to get to market, even if you make compromise. Right? Because you have these decision making where like, oh, I thought it was going to look like this, but it has to look like this. But if you miss the window, and sometimes if you miss windows, then you never get the chance back. Again, we had, can I jump to a different story on the 3D Postman?
Please.
So when I left Disney, I did a venture-backed company, and we kind of followed the same 3D printing idea where we could make you Iron Man. So we partnered with Star Wars and Marvel and the NFL, Major League Baseball. We built a system that would take a 3D scan of your face, and then you could become a 3D printed character. So you could literally become Iron Man. Or eventually Hasbro built a toy line. So you could become a posable action figure. You could buy yourself as a Star Wars figure or a Marvel character. And we launched at Comic-Con in San Diego with the Marvel line. And when we got back, Walmart called me and they're like, hey, Sid, how many stores can you launch in? And we had just launched 2 months before that. And this is the end of June, and Superhero September, which is what they want me to launch for, is clearly in September. So this is fairly only 60 days away. And we have one scanning machine, because at the time your phone, the chipset that we used is now the chipset in your phone for 3D scanning, but that was not possible. Anyway, and even the chipset in your phone today has lighting challenges if you really want good 3D captures. And I'm like, okay, well, how many will you pay for? That was my first response to Walmart. And I still actually can't believe that we did this, but I was also very confident that no one was going to call me again and ask me to launch for Superhero September if I missed the window. So my answer is generally yes. People call me with big opportunities. I generally say yes, even if it seems impossible. It's just been my theory, because the calls don't come again. If I say, no, I'm not ready, I'll do it in a year, they will not call me. It was the same thing with the Disney opportunity. They were going to call me 6 months from then if I didn't say yes and say, come back. And so I don't know how we did this in 60 days. I'm still just going to say that. We have these 3D printed collectibles. Our average price point's like $130 to buy yourself as a full color 3D printed collectible as Iron Man or Captain America or Black Widow. And I figured this was not going to be a good price point for Walmart, even though Walmart asked us to come in. I'm like, we're going to have to get a price point under $50. How in the world am I going to get a price point under $50? Material costs on 3D printing are too high. Oh, the only way to do it's going to be develop a toy. This thinking patterns happening in like seconds, right? Because we're like, okay, how do we get a lower price point? We're like, oh, we need a toy. Oh, we quickly find out the global toy licenses are held by Hasbro. You can't make a toy for Marvel unless you talk to the guys at Hasbro and they authorize you with an agreement. We don't know anyone at Hasbro, but we should know someone. So we find a guy, Kenny, who's now my really good friend. We're like, hey, Kenny, we saw your name in 3D printing with Hasbro. We need to launch this with Walmart in 60 days. He's like, okay, well, maybe we can have that happen. We start this sequence of like getting them product, testing it. It's now like mid-July. And eventually we launched for Superhero September with an action figure line. We had to develop, I think we built 15 more scanners. We launched them all over Walmart across the country. But we made big trade-offs.
My apologies. Sorry.
Yes, my phone. We made big trade-offs along the way. So the Hasbro couldn't make us an actual toy line in time because you can't get anything out of China that fast. So all they could say is, well, we can send you our existing action figures. And to send us your existing action figures meant we had to pop off the heads, put new heads on them, color match them, repackage them, and ship them. I actually still have all the heads.
Oh my gosh.
Because I'm not getting rid of them. So I have huge containers of heads that have been popped off. I'm Captain America. If I can creepy, it's fine. I'm keeping
You
them.
should stick it in a freezer.
Sure. I feel it. Exactly. I should do that. Exactly, because I was like, oh, this represents, and we did all of that in 60 days, completely invented a new product and made every trade-off, right? We knew it meant we had to create packaging, we had to repackage them ourselves, we had to get them shipped to people, we had to create, like we literally had to pop off heads, put O-rings on, test them, do all of those things. And we launched it for Superhero September in 60 days because they wouldn't have asked us later. And that led to a Target rollout, or Toys R Us rollout, a full production line from Hasbro.
That's what changed everything.
It changes everything. So I think when people knock on the door and give you opportunities, you're going to make a bunch of trade-offs. It's not going to look like you would have hoped, but if you don't make them, you don't get the next thing.
Not everybody has that attitude. Not everybody can make that happen. I mean, I'm sure you've worked with companies where you feel like we're coming up with reasons why this can't
For sure.
work. Do you think that's innate, or can people change? Can we be? Is it a mindset, or is it how we're wired to see why things can't work as opposed to how we can make them work?
So
60 days for everything you just described seems crazy.
I know, I actually
It's a
can
great-
no longer tell the story without thinking it was just crazy
Yeah.
to believe that we could do that. And sitting at that moment, we never said that.
Mm.
Part of it too is sometimes you're going to hit natural no's or barriers that you just can't possibly get through.
Mm.
But if you predict that you can't get through it before you try, then you actually never make it you don't make it farther.
Mm.
Right? Because doors are naturally going to close, right? Even if I think back to like when I'm interviewing for jobs, when I'm coming out of my undergrad, a bunch of those companies told me no, right? Like, we don't want to hire you. You don't fit for the position, right? Doors are going to naturally close, but people do naturally close their own doors, right? Where they think of all the reasons something will fail, all the reasons they can't make something possible. So they
Yeah.
stop themselves from going forward instead of saying someone else will close doors for me. So I definitely think there's a mindset. People do come naturally directed in one way or the other, right? Naturally like, oh, there's lots of barriers, or I can break through them. I do think you can learn to break through barriers. I think it puts you, if you're naturally the other way, in uncomfortable places. But I just don't personally know a way through all the problems that we face without just saying, I'm willing to go for it. And I'll run into the next problem, and then I'll take it down, and I'll take it down again and again. And sometimes it won't turn out like you want, right? Sometimes you're going to hit a wall so great that you can't possibly move forward from that one idea. But the place that you got to will pivot you to something that's still a good path to go down.
That's such great advice, Sid. You've experienced folks that you've now known for a couple of decades.
Mhm.
What patterns do you see, and sort of relating and building on what you just said, in what patterns do you see in those whom you've known for that long, who have achieved their aspirations versus those who haven't? Are there patterns? Are there consistent patterns, or is it luck of the draw?
That's a good question. I mean, part of life is luck.
Mm.
That is for sure true. Like, you look at different pathways of people and you're like, how did they achieve that, right? Versus other people that you know who similarly talented could have achieved that. So a lot of life are right time, right circumstance, right network. That is for sure true. But I am also a believer that if you start to see the patterns in life, you can put yourself in those right circumstances. I think one of the things that is underappreciated for everyone, and we were talking a little bit about, starting companies, is that I think we sometimes underappreciate how important the right circumstances and the right situations are, and finding our ways to get into those. Because we tend to believe that, if you have all of the talent, you'll just naturally get there. It's just not true. You actually need lots of people and circumstances to help make you successful. You need people to tap you on the shoulder. You need you need to be placed in those. But I've also come to realize that a lot of the people who, let's say they're all equally smart, their success is based on this talent they have to get into the right networks and circumstances that accelerate them faster than they can do on their own.
Mm.
Because it's really hard to do something on your own. It's really hard to do something. I'm not a believer you can do anything on your own. I think you need lots of great people around you. I think you need lots of great advocates. I think every one of us need people who tap us on the shoulder, who champion us, who help us go further, who see talents that we might have thought weren't as talent. They weren't talents because someone along the way told us they weren't. And I think the faster you can get to those circles where people are really great at helping you, the faster path people have had to success. And some people are really good at noticing it sooner rather than others along their way.
So I really appreciate that. And I'd love to have you personalize it a little bit more. We have some interns and apprentices who are with us for another week or two.
Yes.
I'd love for you to give advice to them if they're in high school. What piece of advice would you take the advice you just gave broadly and sort of personalize for a high school student versus someone who's about to graduate from college and maybe get their first job?
Yeah. So you're making me think of two things. One is, I think when opportunity knocks, you should take it. And you should try really hard not to tell yourself why you'll fail at it. But when it comes, you should take it. And if you do fail, it will be okay because there's something else there. I think that should universally be true for all of us. We'll make a bunch of mistakes. But if you never try, you will never get to some new path of opportunity. Big believer in that. Do you guys know Shannon Happy Barkey, who lives up here? She's an Olympic medalist. So she's a good friend of mine. And we were talking a little while ago, and she was telling me about her training when she was getting ready for the Olympics. So she's won 2 Olympic medals. One of them was in Deer Valley. She actually has a run named after her. They named a run after her this year. And she was talking about the fact that she decided in her training to apply this rule of one more. This idea that every time she went to work out and she was doing like squats or sit-ups or whatever it was, she'd just do one more of them in that moment, which feels sometimes really hard in that moment, but just doing one more. And she found over the course of a year, it completely changed her strength and her ability, which I think did lead to her ability to win some of the medals that she won. And she was talking about how that just made such a huge difference in her ability to perform. And so then it really made me start thinking about, well, how does this idea of the rule of one more apply in a business situation? Because as I think about, like, I run the Women Tech Council, I think a lot about how do you accelerate opportunity for women in tech from high school to the boardroom? How do you think about how do we just change career paths? And I think this idea of one more is really interesting. When you're in a position where you can help other people, or no matter where you're at, what happens if all of us do one more thing to help one more person? Because it's as simple as, hey, I got invited to a networking event, and wonder what happens if I bring one more person with me? What happens if when someone asks me to do something and I don't have time for it, I actually don't say no, I give it to someone else? What happens if I do all these little tiny things that just cross my desk in an everyday moment that gives someone else an opportunity that they will not have on their own? And I think we can do this at every stage. So as I was talking with Shannon, and I kind of already naturally do this, but it's become a really big focus for me because I get lots of things that come into my inbox. And I want to tap people faster. I want women now who come into the workforce to get to their destinies faster than I did. I want everyone. I want that for men and women. And today it's possible, but it's only possible if we help people. And so I think about it as in all of our circles, what's something that you're doing that if you invited one more person, if you talked to one more person, if you gave them one more connection that you have that would take you a few more seconds to do, what would it do for someone? It will change what they can become faster than they can ever do it on your own. So I've become really intentional. For me, this has shown up this year in places like, I tend to, and I think this is true of lots of CEOs, you have lots of natural places to get recognition. That people recognize that you're doing stuff because you're visible. That's true for everyone else on your team. So I'm like, I'm going to take all the other people on my team. I'm going to figure out ways where they get recognition, where they get to show up on a stage, where they get into a network that they didn't already have. And I'm going to do that as much as I possibly can in all of those. When something comes across my desk that I would naturally say, I do not have time for, I'm going to look at my team or people I know and I'm going to say, I've got the person for you. I'm going to put that person in that spot because they're never going to get the call. And so for me, it started to really reflect on, I can be an accelerator for people, that people who are building careers, they can be faster. And I think this is true no matter what stage of your career. It just takes you to think about it. Where do you show up? What do you get access to? Can you put someone on a special project? Do you give them a talent that they don't already have? Do you put them in a role where they get an opportunity to succeed? And do you move them forward? And I would say even in my job now, so I'm running a company called Brandless, and it's owned by a family office, the Clark Capital family office. And of all the boards I've ever worked for, James is really good at being an advocate for me and putting me in networks that I would not normally have access to. Because I don't come from the same networks of him. I come from tech networks. I come from some of the venture capital networks. His networks are very different. And he has been very good at intentionally being like, hey, Sid, you should come show up to this. Hey, Sid, I'm going to put you on this committee. Sid, I'm going to do this. And I wouldn't get to those rooms without his support. And I believe that's true for everyone. So for me, this is like, you only have so much time, and we have to spend time helping other people. And I'm a big believer that we all have circles that we exist in that we can do a better job at helping someone else have a faster path or more success than we have.
Thank you so much for that advice. I know I promised you a hard stop in just a few minutes. So as recognition again for our apprentices and interns, I'm going to let you guys ask 1 or 2 questions today instead of the team. Since some of you we only have for another week, I believe.
I have one for you.
Okay.
I'm currently studying my MBA at the U. I'm probably also going to start a Master in Finance next year. And something really caught my attention when you said that people probably wanted you to be working with them because there are not many women in tech. And I experienced that from like what I've done before, and probably as a woman in finance, it's also known that there aren't too many.
Yep.
So how do you navigate it, and how did you put a brave face if you ever felt that you were a token and not was where they were because of you? And how do you make them realize that you were valuable because of you and not because you're a woman in tech? Or
Yeah, it's an interesting question that I think about often, because I've had experiences on both sides, right? I've walked into rooms when we were raising money where people assumed I was a secretary, right? Instead of someone leading, right? Or they haven't directed questions towards me. Just, I don't think they were intentionally trying to be mean. It was just a bias that showed up in the room. So I usually always orient myself first and foremost that I think people generally have good intent. So they're not trying to be assholes at the very beginning. And so that is always kind of directed how I show up in a room, right? That I'm talented enough, I deserve to be here, and I'm going to find a way to communicate the knowledge that I have in a correct way. And I will actually say that, so I've taken a lot of ownership for how I show up in a room, right? And what I expect, and my willingness to be aggressive enough to speak up around things that I think are interesting. I would also say sometimes early in my career, I was probably more aggressive in how I showed up in the room than I think was good. So when I was at Novell, my VP, he came to me after one of the meetings and he's like, Sid, you have to stop talking so much. And he gave me just this great feedback. And it was one of those moments too, where I could have been like, you're wrong. I need to show up. I have all these really great things to say. People should be listening to me. Or I could have reflected on that. For me, it became a moment of reflection because he said, people will start to dismiss you more if you keep doing that, right? They won't listen to you because you're just trying to talk all the time instead of listen to what they have to say. That became a very defining moment in my career where I said, I'm going to work really hard to be great at listening, great at adding value, and contribute. So that kind of underlying theory has really been fundamental to me, because most of the time, and most of my career, I've been the only woman in the room. But I've never thought of it as a disadvantage. And the rooms that I walk into where I think, men have discounted me, actually just never walk back into that room. I'm not going to go fight against that. I'm just going to find great people to work with. And I'm going to put myself and align myself in relationships where they believe that what I bring to the table is valuable.
thank you.
Anything? Lance?
So when you kind of encounter these new opportunities and something was thrown at you that you wanted to do to kind of jump into it in the moment, but you didn't have all of the requisite maybe skills and knowledge, how did you onboard yourself so quickly to whatever you needed to do? And what was kind of your strategy for tackling stuff that you might not have known going into the position or making those pivots?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's reminding me when I jumped into Disney. So as you know, I always take the opportunity, right? Even if I don't know. When I jumped into Disney, all the Disney research work was focused on 3D modeling, computer vision, AI, robotics, all places I had not spent my career to date. I had just come off of building we built that. We had 100 million concurrent active users on a Facebook API, right? I had not done this work. 3D, completely out of the realm of anything that I've studied. So I jumped into that, and I was way behind the curve on the technical side of that, even though I understood technology. And I've always just jumped into it with, like, I ask a lot of questions. So I'm okay not knowing something, but I'm not okay not asking the questions, so I get there faster. And a lot of people won't ask the questions because they don't want to seem like they don't know it. And I'm totally fine being like, I actually don't know. Can you explain it to me? So, like, I remember Tom many times teaching me all about, per vertex and what I need to know about the z-axis in addition to the x and y and all of those things. And then I'm a big consumer of information all the time. So I have lots of data feeds that come into me every day. I scan all of them. I try to get up to speed on those. And when I go into a new industry, I figure out who has really good information on that. And I start getting fed that information as fast as I possibly can. But I do think it comes down to willingness to ask questions. You don't have to have all the answers. But if you ask questions, you learn so much faster. And people are generally willing to help people, right? All of us are willing usually to help people, but people don't ask questions. So then you don't know they needed help.
Such great advice. Thank you so much, Sid, for taking the time, and thank you on behalf of the whole team for the impact you've made to our community. It's not just women, it's the entire community has really benefited from you.
Well,
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to see all of you.